The rain had stopped, but the world still looked broken. Fallen trees lay across the muddy road. Roofs were torn apart, and the wind carried the smell of wet metal and burnt wood. Ethan Cole, a human engineer working with relief convoys, walked slowly through the wreckage of an alien village. He had seen storms before, but nothing like this. The alien sky was greenish and heavy, the clouds still flashing quietly as if the storm was not done yet. He came to a small clearing where a cracked hut stood, its roof half missing. Beside it, a woman of another world knelt in the mud, trying to lift a broken beam with her trembling arms. Her skin had a faint silver tone, and her eyes glowed like faint embers under her wet hair. A small child clung to her back, coughing weakly. Ethan watched her for a moment, realizing she was working with nothing. No tools, no help, just her will. He dropped his pack and ran forward. "Let me help," he said gently. The alien woman froze, her muscles stiff as if expecting harm. Humans were rare here and not always welcome. But when Ethan placed his hands under the beam and lifted it aside, she looked up, her expression full of exhaustion and disbelief. "Why?" she asked in a low voice. "Because no one should rebuild alone," he replied. The woman's name was Lyra, a widow. Her husband had been taken by the storm, or maybe by the sea that swallowed half their village. Her little boy, barely 5, had not spoken a word since that night. Ethan built a small fire with his portable stove and offered them dry rations. Lyra hesitated but finally took them, her hands shaking. They sat together under the broken roof as the rain began again, light and slow. That night Ethan stayed near their hut. Unable to leave, every few minutes the alien wind howled through the gaps, and the child whimpered in his sleep. Ethan adjusted a blanket around him. Lyra watched silently, her eyes reflecting the small fire. "You're not afraid of us?" she asked after a long pause. Ethan smiled tiredly. "I've seen humans scarier than any alien." In the distance, a faint sound echoed. Not thunder, not wind, but something else. Ethan stood up, scanning the tree line through the fading mist. He saw flickers of movement, shadows slipping between the trees. Lyra tensed, clutching her child. "They come at night," she whispered. "To take what's left." Ethan's jaw tightened. He reached into his bag and pulled out a compact torch and a metal bar. The closest thing he had to a weapon. He stayed awake, standing guard beside the small fire. When he heard footsteps crunching on the wet soil, he raised the torch, the bright beam cutting through the darkness. 3 shapes froze, their eyes reflecting the light. Scavengers from another village. "Go," Ethan said firmly, his voice calm but sharp. The strangers stared for a moment, then melted back into the forest. Lyra exhaled shakily, her hand over her mouth. When dawn came, the sky turned pale blue, the first calm morning in days. Ethan looked at the ruined village and then at the widow and her son. He knew his mission was only to deliver supplies and move on. But as he watched the child trying to smile at him, something inside told him he couldn't just leave. He turned to Lyra, his boots sinking into the mud. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "We'll build something better." Lyra's eyes widened, half in shock, half in hope. No one had said such words to her since before the storm. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time, lighting the ruins like gold, and in that light, the human and the alien mother began their new beginning. Together, morning came with a strange stillness. The storm had passed, but the ground still whispered with every step. Soaked and soft, Ethan stood beside the broken hut, his hands covered in mud, his mind already thinking of plans. The walls leaned to one side, the roof sagged like a tired sigh, and the small doorway was barely standing. Lyra stood nearby, wrapping her son in a blanket. Her eyes empty yet alert. She had lost too much. But there was still a quiet fire inside her, a will that refused to die. Ethan began to work, using every tool he had in his pack. He measured the broken beams, cut them shorter, and used salvaged nails from the ruins nearby. Lyra watched for a while before kneeling beside him, handing him stones and wood. Her movements were slow but steady. "Your people build differently," she said softly. Ethan smiled a little. "We build to last, even when the world doesn't want us to." The child sat in the corner, playing with a small metal piece Ethan had given him, a fragment of a human ship badge. He traced the letters slowly, his lips trying to form the strange human words. Lyra noticed, her face softening for the first time. "You gave him that?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Something to remind him he's safe now." Lyra turned away quickly, hiding the tears that had filled her eyes by noon. They had raised one side of the shelter again. Ethan's arms ached, but he didn't stop. He noticed how the alien wood resisted bending, stronger yet harder to cut. Still, he found a way, adapting human skill to alien material, creating something new. When Lyra saw the wall standing straight again, she whispered, "It's the first time it looks alive since the storm." But peace never lasted long here. That night, strange flickers of light moved again between the trees. Silent and slow, Lyra's eyes followed them nervously. "It's them again," she murmured. "They watch us, the others. They think I brought the storm." Ethan turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Her voice broke. "They said the gods punished us because I spoke to a human once before the storms came." Ethan's chest tightened. So that was why she lived alone, rejected and blamed for nature's wrath. He looked at the boy, thin and quiet, and anger rose in his heart. "Then they don't deserve your strength," he said firmly. Lyra looked at him as if hearing those words healed something invisible inside her. They worked again the next day, despite the whispers in the distance. Ethan showed her how to make a stronger base using stones. Pressing them deep into the wet soil, he reinforced the walls with a crossbeam pattern, and Lyra added alien resin that hardened like glass when dry. It was a strange mix, human design and alien nature, but it worked beautifully. The new shelter looked like a promise, standing firm under the pale alien sun. That evening, as the last light faded, Lyra's child brought Ethan a small flower, bright blue and glowing faintly in the dark. He smiled, placing it near the window frame. "Now it's a home," he said quietly. Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them said everything. But far beyond the forest in the distance, a group of figures watched from the shadows. Their leader whispered, "So the human builds with her now?" A cold wind blew through the ruins, carrying the faint sound of footsteps leaving. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the real storm was not over. This one would not come from the sky. It would come from the hearts of those who feared change. The next morning felt too quiet. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of wet soil and burning ash from the night's fire. Ethan woke early, his instincts restless, his mind still replaying the faint voices he had heard near the forest line. Lyra was already awake, sitting beside her child, her eyes scanning the trees. Something had changed. The silence was not peace anymore. It was warning. Ethan picked up his small scanner, a human device for detecting motion and heat. He set it near the tree stump close to the shelter. The screen blinked twice, showing faint red dots moving slowly in the distance. "Someone's out there," he whispered. Lyra's hand tightened on her child's shoulder. "They're watching again," her voice trembled. Not from fear alone, but from memory. The last time strangers came. They took her husband's tools and left him wounded. Ethan knew he couldn't let that happen again. He checked the metal bar he had used before and began sharpening one end against a rock. He wasn't a soldier, but he had been trained to survive in rough colonies. When Lyra saw what he was doing, she said quietly, "You'll get yourself hurt. Human." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'll make sure they don't hurt you." They spent the day pretending everything was normal. Working near the half-built home, Ethan reinforced the roof with stronger beams, while Lyra collected dry resin from the nearby trees. Her child played near the fire, drawing strange shapes in the dirt, circles and stars that looked almost human. Ethan noticed and laughed softly. "Looks like he's learning engineering already." Lyra smiled, her first true smile since he met her, and for a brief moment the air felt warm again. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows gathered. The wind began to hum through the trees like a warning song. Ethan turned on his small torch, its beam cutting across the darkness. The scanner beeped again, at a closer this time. Lyra froze, clutching her child, her voice barely a whisper. "They're coming." Shapes emerged from the tree line, tall, cloaked figures with glowing green eyes carrying curved spears made from bone and light. Ethan stepped forward, planting his feet in the mud. "Stop there," he called out, his voice calm but cold. One of them hissed in a strange alien tongue, then switched to broken human speech. "You build with her?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, I help her." "And her son?" The leader laughed, a sound sharp as broken glass. "Then you are cursed too." Before Ethan could speak, one of the raiders lunged forward. Ethan swung the metal bar instinctively, blocking the strike, the clash ringing through the forest like thunder. Lyra screamed his name, her child crying in fear. Ethan pushed the attacker back with all his strength, the man slipping into the mud. The torchlight flashed across their faces. They were thin, desperate. Survivors turned scavengers. Ethan shouted, "There's enough for everyone. You don't have to steal." But his words fell like stones. Unheard and unwanted, the fight ended quickly, the raiders retreating when one of them was hit by the light beam from Ethan's torch. They had never seen technology like it before. They disappeared into the forest, leaving behind only their footprints and whispers. Lyra ran to Ethan, her hands shaking. "You could have died." He wiped the mud from his face and smiled tiredly. "But you didn't, that's what matters." Later that night, as they sat near the small fire, the child finally spoke his first word in days. "Safe," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. Lyra's eyes filled with tears and Ethan felt a deep warmth in his chest. But somewhere far away the raiders were regrouping, and one of them muttered, "Next time he won't be ready." The storm outside had ended long ago, but a new one was beginning to rise, not of wind and rain, but of fear and courage, and in that fragile shelter, one human stood ready to face it. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the cracked clouds. The forest around the small home was still damp, carrying the smell of smoke and wet leaves. Ethan woke to the soft sound of tools clinking. Lyra was already working outside, repairing what had been damaged in the night. Her movements were steady, precise, but her eyes carried the weight of fear that hadn't faded. The child slept beside the fire, his tiny hands clutching the small metal badge Ethan had given him. Ethan stepped out quietly, stretching his sore arms. The ground bore the marks of footprints, proof of the raiders' visit. He crouched near the doorway, checking the wooden supports. "They'll come again," he murmured to himself. Lyra glanced at him, her voice calm but tired. "They always come back when they smell hope." Ethan looked at the small structure they had built together. Walls half done, a roof patched with alien resin. It wasn't just a shelter anymore, it was a symbol. Something told him that if they finished it, it would stand against more than storms. He turned to Lyra. "We'll make it stronger. Something they can't burn or break." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "You really believe it can last?" Ethan smiled. "I don't build to survive storms. I build to end them." They worked through the day. Ethan used the human toolkit from his convoy, a small solar welder, cutting old metal into smooth shapes. Lyra gathered more of the clear resin that hardened under sunlight. Together they created panels that looked like glass but were tougher than stone. As they worked side by side, a quiet rhythm formed between them. No words, just trust. Every nail hammered, every beam lifted, was a small promise kept by afternoon. The walls stood straight and proud. The roof curved like a shield, shining softly under the pale alien sun. Ethan stood back, wiping sweat from his face. "It's not much yet, but it's a start." Lyra looked at the home with a strange expression, part disbelief, part awe. "My people, they build huts, not homes," she whispered, "but this feels alive." As evening fell, the forest began to glow faintly with floating spores. The child laughed for the first time. Chasing the lights near the door, Ethan watched him and smiled. "He's healing," Lyra nodded, her voice softer than the wind. "Because he believes this house won't fall." But even in peace, danger never stayed far. From the ridge beyond the forest, two figures watched them through the shadows. One spoke in a low, rough tone. "The human's still here. He's building something big," the other replied. "Then we'll make sure it never stands." Their eyes glowed briefly before they vanished back into the mist. Inside the shelter, Ethan drew rough sketches on a piece of metal sheet. Blueprints for a water collector, a heating system, and maybe even a wall around the village someday. Lyra leaned closer, fascinated by his ideas. "You think like a dreamer," she said softly. Ethan chuckled. "Dreamers built every world humans live on." When night came, rain began to fall again. But this time, the drops slid off the roof like nothing could touch it. The fire inside burned bright, warm, and steady. Lyra sat with her child while Ethan repaired a tool near the door. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, but no leak, no creak, no fear entered the home. Lyra looked at him and whispered, "Maybe this is what safety feels like." Ethan looked up, smiling gently. "Then let's make sure it lasts forever." And in that fragile corner of the galaxy, two souls from different worlds built not just shelter, but the beginning of hope. The days passed quietly, and for the first time since the storm, peace began to feel real. The house stood firm, its walls gleaming faintly when sunlight touched them. Half human metal and half alien resin, it looked different from every other ruin nearby. Solid, warm and alive, Ethan added small touches each day, carving vents for air and setting up a water filter he'd built from scrap. Lyra watched him with quiet pride, though she still didn't fully believe the world would let her keep this happiness. Her child played outside now, chasing glowing insects through the tall grass. His laughter filled the air, the kind of sound that once seemed impossible in a world of loss. Ethan smiled every time he heard it, a reminder that small things mattered most. But deep in the distance, smoke rose, a thin, dark column against the pale green sky. Lyra saw it first and her breath caught. "They're coming back," she whispered. By evening, a group of alien villagers arrived, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had returned to see what the storm had left behind, and what they found stunned them. A home stood tall where only wreckage should have remained, and in front of it stood a human, strong, calm, and muddy from work. Whispers spread among them like wildfire. "That's her, the widow who lived, and she's with a human." Ethan greeted them with a cautious smile. "You made it through the storm?" The leader, an older alien with a scarred face, stepped forward. "We came to see what still stands," he said coldly. "And to take what belongs to us." Lyra stepped beside Ethan, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Nothing here belongs to you, not anymore." The crowd murmured in shock. A widow defying the elders? That had never happened before. The old leader's eyes darkened. "You build with human ways. You bring curses." Ethan clenched his fist but held his tone calm. "No curse. Just hard work and hope." He tapped the wall beside him. "This house survived when everything else fell." The villagers stared at it, half curious, half afraid. One young alien reached out, touching the surface, feeling its strange strength. "It's warm," he said softly. "Like it's alive." The leader scowled. "His kind brings war, not warmth." Lyra's voice rose, sharp and fierce. "Then why did your kind leave me to die in the rain?" Silence fell, thick and heavy. She stepped forward, pointing to the child. "He saved my son. He built us a home while you hid from thunder." Ethan stood still, watching her with quiet respect. He didn't need to speak. Her voice carried the truth he couldn't say. The crowd shifted uneasily, their anger softening into guilt one by one. They looked at the home again, not as a curse but as proof of survival. The young alien who had touched the wall spoke again. "Can you build more like this?" Ethan met his eyes and nodded. "If you're willing to help." By nightfall, the visitors left, but something had changed in their hearts. Whispers spread through nearby villages about a human who built storm-proof homes. Some called it madness, others called it a miracle. Lyra sat by the fire that night, her hands clasped together. "They'll be back," she said softly. Ethan looked out through the small window. "Then we'll be ready, not to fight but to build." The stars outside shimmered brighter than usual, reflecting in the puddles near the house for the first time. The village didn't feel cursed anymore. It felt like the beginning of something new, a fragile alliance shaped by courage, loss, and one human's will to care. And though Ethan didn't say it aloud, he knew this was only the start. The days that followed felt different. Where once there was silence, now there was the sound of tools, footsteps, and voices. Ethan's home, once seen as strange, had become a symbol of survival. Slowly, alien families began returning from the hills, carrying what little they had. They came with suspicion in their eyes, but also curiosity, drawn to the sight of a shelter that had endured the storm. Ethan didn't make speeches or promises, he simply worked. He showed anyone willing to learn how to use stones for foundation, how to fit beams together, how to strengthen walls with alien resin and human nails. Lyra stood beside him every day, her hands never still, her quiet leadership earning respect even from those who once shunned her. Her son played nearby, sometimes carrying tools that were too big for him, sometimes laughing with the other children who dared to come close. At first, the villagers only watched, but when the first new roof stood firm under another rain, the change began. One by one, they joined in. Young aliens, elders, even those who had once whispered curses. Ethan guided them patiently, never judging their mistakes. He taught them to build with rhythm and teamwork, showing them how strength came not from power, but from unity. "This is how humans survive," he told them. By standing together when the world breaks, Lyra's confidence grew each day. She became the heart of the work, translating Ethan's ideas into her people's language. Calming their fears, she showed them that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. When the older ones questioned her, she answered softly, "The storm took everything, but it didn't take our hands." Her words spread through the village like light through fog. By the end of the week, 3 new homes stood tall beside theirs, each one stronger, brighter, and more beautiful than the ruins that once marked the land. Children began to play again in the open fields. Ethan watched them with a quiet smile, though a part of him still stayed alert. He knew peace could vanish as fast as it had come, and he hadn't forgotten the raiders who had promised to return. That evening, Lyra found him outside, sitting beside the water stream that ran behind the houses. The sun was setting, painting the alien sky with gold and violet. "You've done something no one thought possible," she said softly. Ethan looked up at her, his face tired but warm. "We did it together." Lyra hesitated before sitting beside him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Do you ever miss your own world?" He smiled faintly. "Every day, but maybe I was meant to build this one instead." The wind carried laughter from the new homes. Fires burned gently, not in fear but in comfort. For the first time, the village glowed with life again. Lyra's son ran up to Ethan, holding a small wooden carving of a house. He said proudly, "For you." Ethan took it carefully, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you." Little builder, but just beyond the hills, dark figures moved under the night sky. The raiders had seen the rebuilt village from afar. Their leader clenched his fists, his voice low and filled with anger. "The human spreads his curse. We'll end it before it spreads further." The others nodded, their weapons catching the faint moonlight. Unaware of the threat rising again, the village slept peacefully. Ethan dreamed of brighter days and new homes across the land. But dawn would bring a different kind of storm, one not made of rain or thunder. This one would test what they had truly built: a home, a bond, and their courage to stand together. The morning began with a golden mist rolling through the valley. Bird-like creatures sang from the treetops, and the rebuilt homes shimmered softly in the early light. Ethan stepped outside, stretching his arms, feeling pride swell quietly in his chest. The air smelled of earth and resin, the scent of hard work and new beginnings. He looked at the line of homes, proof that hope could be built with bare hands and courage. Lyra was already awake, sweeping the front step with calm precision. Her child ran around chasing glowing insects, his laughter echoing across the clearing. For a moment, everything felt right. Ethan allowed himself to believe they had finally earned peace. But peace in this world never lasted long. It began with a low hum in the distance, then came the smell of smoke. Sharp and bitter, Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes narrowing toward the hills, Lyra froze beside him, whispering, "No, not again." Dark shapes appeared through the mist. The raiders had returned, and this time there were more of them. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed his tool belt and ran to the edge of the village, his heart pounding. The villagers, startled and afraid, began gathering their children. Lyra shouted, "Don't run! Go inside the homes. They're strong, they'll hold." Her voice steadied the panic, her leadership rising like a flame in the storm. Ethan stood in front, metal bar in hand, his stance firm. He wasn't a soldier, but he was human, and humans didn't back down when families were in danger. The raider leader stepped forward, his voice full of hatred. "You built their faith with lies, human," he hissed. "You've made them forget their gods." Ethan's voice was calm but cold. "No, I reminded them how to stand." The leader raised his weapon, but before he could strike, something unexpected happened. Dozens of villagers stepped out from behind the homes, holding tools, stones, and wooden spears. Lyra walked to Ethan's side, her eyes fierce and bright. "If he falls," she said, "then so do we." The raiders hesitated, the fire in their eyes dimming as they faced not one man, but a village united. Ethan raised his voice. "You called me cursed, but look, your storm is gone. Your people live, your children laugh again. If that's a curse, then maybe you should pray for more of it." The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. The raider leader lowered his weapon slowly, his expression twisted between anger and shame. He looked around, at the standing homes, at the villagers who no longer looked afraid. Then, with a sharp motion, he turned away. We'll see how long your peace lasts, he muttered before vanishing into the mist. The others followed, their shadows fading into the forest. When the danger passed, the villagers broke into cheers. Children ran out laughing, and Lyra dropped to her knees, holding her son tight. Ethan stood still for a moment, staring at the horizon. The adrenaline slowly fading from his body, Lyra looked up at him, her eyes glistening. You stayed when no one else did. Ethan smiled gently. You just needed someone to start the first wall. Weeks passed, and the village grew stronger. They built gardens, wells, and gathering places, each one designed with both human and alien hands. The once lonely clearing had become a small community of two worlds working as one, a monument of unity born from pain, courage, and faith. On the last evening, before Ethan prepared to return to his human station, Lyra placed a small carving in his hands. A miniature version of their home, she whispered. You didn't just build us a shelter, Ethan. You built us a future. He looked at her, speechless, as her son hugged his leg. Smiling bright, Ethan's voice broke softly. No, Lyra, you built this too. As the twin suns set over the horizon, painting gold across the village roofs, Ethan looked back one last time. The home stood tall, glowing like hearts under the fading light, and he realized that somewhere far from Earth, he had helped build not just houses, but the first home of two worlds.